Welcome to another episode of Chat with Chet. Today I am joined by Chandler McCann with DataRobot. And Chandler, why don't you go ahead and give yourself just a, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Chet. Appreciate you having me. But my name is Chandler McCann. I am a data scientist at DataRobot. Been here for 7.5 years now, so quite a long time for startup terms. DataRobot is a enterprise AI platform that makes it extremely easy to build, high-value business applications in a really governed way. And I've been part of that process over the last 7 years plus. But currently, in my role, I am field CTO for our partnerships and alliances. So I currently lead all the tech integrations for our SAP partnership, and what that looks like is building out AI applications that we can scale across our joint customer base and new customers, and bringing to market both predictive and generative AI apps and together. So
Very cool.
prior to that, also too, I led our federal team for a number of years. So a lot of experience working with Chet and the Vertosoft team.
Yeah, and we're glad you're able to take a few minutes to chat today. I remember when I first saw DataRobot back in the day. I mean, it's been several years now. It sounds kind of crazy, but in the buzzword today, right? Here we are, March 6th, 2025. It seems like everywhere we look, the buzzword is, generative AI. And before we're definitely going to talk about that, but you don't hear, at least in the press or at least in the trade rag, you don't necessarily hear so much anymore about what I would say, maybe it's now the legacy AI, right? Nobody's talking about decision trees that I hear about, or state or support vector machines, or KNN or gradient boosted trees, or any of those Bayesian networks. That might be a little more old school, but you don't hear that much. I'm curious from your perspective and the types of things you're doing. Is that dead? Is that what's going on in that world from your perspective?
That's a great question, and I think the short answer to that is no. At Predictive AI, kind of classical supervised machine learning isn't going away, and I don't think it'll ever go away. Personal opinion here, but it's certainly out of the hype cycle when it comes to the media and in terms of relative developments, what's been happening in generative AI and large language models, large vision models over the last year and change. Specifically has just been incredible. So I think rightfully so, we're getting a lot of coverage and a lot of excitement because those capabilities are exponentially improving. It seems to be week over week. But when it comes to driving outcomes, especially for federal organizations, civilian organizations, you're always going to want to, there's always going to be a predictive component. And I think what I'd impart on folks is that large language models don't solve everything, so they're not going to replace decision trees or XGBoost for all use cases. So.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they get lost, right? It's I would say they've lost their luster. They're just as important and they're just as powerful in those predictive models. But right, everybody is so enamored with generative AI, and this year we're starting to see the term agentic AI really start to come into play. So I'm interested in your thoughts, and obviously, from a DataRobot perspective, you guys really are on the forefront of just the AI world in general. I'm interested in how you see both the generative AI aspect and the agentic side. How do you think that's really going to influence public sector and what they're trying to do to support their missions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think in terms of how generative AI is going to influence the public sector, it's certainly going to have a massive effect. And I think what's one of the key differences, and one of the reasons that I feel it gets a lot of attention, is because non-scientists, non-data scientists can directly interact with these models, and that's a big change from the classic predictive AI, so to speak, where that's maybe scoring every candidate at the same time behind the scenes and feeding a prediction to a database. So some of the more classical machine learning is uh, out of the view of the consumer, so to speak, but that's not the case with generative AI. So in terms of agentic and what I see coming is improved autonomy, and then we start to see announcements like where OpenAI is discussing licensing out PhD level research assistants for upwards of $20,000 a month, which might seem outrageous in terms of cost, but actually could be pretty reasonable compared to certain consulting engagements. But the ability for language models plus tools, so the ability to interact with APIs, conduct research, conduct web search, control a computer, as that continues to get a lot better, and they're able to execute on tasks for extended periods of times, days, weeks, that can, I would say not replace our workers, but certainly augment them. And so I think we're going to be getting to see a lot more interaction with our knowledge workers, our force, with some of these generative and agentic systems. But I'd say it's still early outside of the very, very large players. So there's always different scales of autonomy, right? And I think getting to that fully autonomous stage is still a ways out. But there's still a lot you can do in the near term.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been interesting. Lately, I've been reading a lot of academic research journals related to AI and the adoption of technology. And there's a well-known you know method that's out there. They call they call it UTOT. It's the Universal Application or Acceptance of Technology. That ironically that came out of Virginia Tech, Dr. Venkatesh. And it's really about and all this research around the adoption of technology and how people use that has been treating these things as tools. But with generative AI and agentic AI, we're starting to get to a point where, with the sheer compute power that we have available, we're starting to see these models become a whole heck of a lot smarter and a lot more capable than historically a traditional IT tool has been. I'd be curious to get your thoughts, and this is more of those crazy theorizing discussions here. In that, right now, a lot of the times it is us as humans, we are delegating our tasks to the AI. Right? I say, do this for me,
Mhm.
but we're getting to a point where the AI can delegate tasks to a human. Right? So you think about Uber and how Uber says, they say, I need somebody to go here, here, and here. And it's the algorithm that is, in essence, dictating how somebody does something. So I'm interested in your thoughts on how you think that might affect both the public sector and how you think that might evolve as both agentic AI and generative AI continue to grow in capability.
Yeah, it's a question we weren't wrestling with directly, right? A few years ago. When I think about your question here, what comes to mind is just this concept of reasoning and the ability to deconstruct tasks and prioritize like an execution pattern. This is something that we've seen improve a lot in more recent models. Claude 3.7 is a great example of that. OpenAI 01 and 03, ability to deconstruct a big problem into smaller chunks and either task other agents or potentially task humans, like you were saying. Um, how that can happen, I think, is going to lighten the load for workers for a lot of potentially tedious tasks that they're doing today, right? So, uh, and you, and I also don't see that going into mission critical, life threatening like kind of kill chain type situations right away. It's going to be on what is what what can we tolerate breaking, in the experimentation cycle. So, for example, we're starting to see in our federal engagements a lot more interested with user groups we never would have worked with historically on predictive side. So, helping to summarize reports, summarize large amounts of research. Execute tasks in that nature. And so that is something that is more suited towards an agent, and that might involve multiple steps, right? So, reading through a number of documents, summarizing, that can be tedious for a human. I think that's a place we're going to start to see the research side of things bubble up. But I think it's going to continue to bump into challenges. So you mentioned UAT. I think what we don't have a great grip on, particularly what we're seeing, at least in the DoD, it's early, is the experimentation and the monitoring to ensure performance. Because you may ask a model to break that task down 10 times in a row, and it's still probabilistic. It may not give you those same steps all 10 times. Often it won't. So how do you control for that in production? And that's authority question.
Yeah, that's probably the big challenge, right? Control in production. There are still challenges with hallucinations in these models. There's a lot of research and a lot of effort to try to fix that. We've seen organizations go and try to combine the large language models with these smaller models and try to chain these things together to help with the concept of hallucination. Um, I'm interested, from your perspective and best practices. What are things that these public sector agencies should be doing to set them up for success as they try to adopt, both again these large language models and this concept of agentic AI?
So I think step one is leaders and particularly IT organizations need to be supportive and try to help their downward organizations. What we this has always been the case, and I think we continue to see it, is there's a fragmented policy between different units or different commands or different services. And so broadly embracing it and providing some support for the units to embrace experimentation is one. So first off, you got to do it. Don't be afraid of it. China is certainly not waiting, right? The second thing is we do need to apply the same rules. I think what's tempting, rules of developing good products that are AI driven. So, for example, it's never been easier to create a cool pilot. Like in an afternoon, you can spin up something that will read through a number of images, perhaps execute a task for you, make an API call, solve something in Excel, write code for you. Like again, getting that to work 100 times in a row is hard. So at DataRobot, we see a few key tools that we built into our agentic systems in terms of monitoring and testing, and for our Gen AI suite in general. And that's being able to experiment with how you prompt. Right? That is still one of the most important things. People could say prompt engineering is dead, but like the reality is it's super important. Being able to create reliable evaluation data sets so you can have some kind of ground truth to which you're experimenting on, even if that is execute these same steps 10 times in a row. If I'm trying to control a drone, for example, like I want to make sure that if a controller indicates to stop, that the agent inside that's executing how to fly it listens, right? So these are important things to test out, but you have to have some kind of evaluation against it. And a system to monitor this over time. And that gets more complex as you start to have agents making dozens of potentially calls in a single thought, but you have to have some kind of traceability to debug it. So I would say experiment, work with partners and vendors in your own teams to just understand where, how you can put some guardrails around your process, but also be leery of the temptation to go from turning on a cool POV, because it's I would say a country mile to production, and that's what's different from the predictive AI. I'm not sure if you're seeing that on your side too. But.
Yeah, no, I think that's you're absolutely right. And we get a lot of questions, I'll call it related to data, and you touched on that a second ago. For as long as statistics have been a thing, good data has always been important to have to make accurate, either predictions or decisions, and this doesn't change. The one thing that we see some of these agencies struggle with is understanding how do they know what good data is. They've got a lot of data, but just because you have a lot of data doesn't mean it's all useful, doesn't mean it's all good. So they struggle with this concept of, well, how do we know what is good? And then how do we manage that? I'm interested in what you're seeing, and maybe if you got any thoughts on things that they maybe or should be thinking of to deal with that problem.
Yeah, it's not as simple as checking for missing values inside your database
Right.
anymore, right? And so that's sort of where the world was. And I think what's changed a lot is this collection of unstructured documents like PDFs and Word, general text documents, image documents. How do you manage that? So it can be daunting to think about how am I going to manage my entire body of knowledge as an organization. Uh, I would say baby steps. Try to scope things down and use like start small, right? If you are really trying to get your hands around how to solve a task, um, keep the scope narrow, right? If you're looking to uh, use generative AI or an agent to, let's say, uh, summarize reports, right? And you're really perhaps intelligence, and you're looking for changes in sentiment, um, keep it scoped to that and spot check and use humans to evaluate initially what data you're using. If the results are correct, what is tempting and doesn't work is trying to give that agent complete unconstrained ability to do a lot of tasks. That's where you're going to fail, and it's really hard to do the data management side of things. So I would say start small, and leverage tools for version control within your organization. There's a whole body of work on knowledge management agents that the groups like Llama Index and the open source community are really leaning into and have some great frameworks for. You run into the issue of, if I build a vector database, for example, for my team to search through, I have to keep updating that. You have to, the world changes. Everything is still a point in time. So you have to create systems to manage documentation, manage these databases like anything else to ensure they've got current knowledge and you're also culling old knowledge. So there's no one size fits all. It's really case by case. That's why I encourage teams to start small, get familiar with the concepts, and get your hands around a problem you can handle first.
Yeah, and so as they start small, the other thing that we're seeing, right? If we go back where we stand today here in 2025, when we go back just a few years ago, and we look at the capabilities of these right now, the large language models of 2 years ago compared to today,
Mhm.
and I'm guessing 6 months from now we're going to be going, oh, holy cow! Even we're even a bit more amazed as these advances. How what kind of guidance would you give to public sector organizations who struggle with this pace, this rapid pace of change? I'm interested in how you could what you would tell them, how to deal with that, so that they don't get frozen in time, thinking that if I wait 2 more months, then I'm going to have something that is going to make my current thing outdated. But at the same time, I need to do something now so I can better support my mission. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, we're in new territory, right? Where technology is changing dramatically. I mean, GPT-3 a year and change ago, 3.5 is vastly different from what we're seeing today. Um, so someone in the organization needs to be keeping an eye on where things are changing. That's one. So just don't let's not lie to ourselves and pretend that it's not going to change. Also, don't sit still. It goes back to what problems are we trying to solve? Like, technology will evolve. You do have a mission, right? And there's always going to be some better way to solve a problem potentially, but um, you can still get very far with what's available today. What's available today is uh, we haven't had in, at our fingertips in terms of humanity. So yes, there's going to be some cool new things coming in a few months, but there's a lot to get your hands around today. So get started now. Like I said, um, you put it using classical machine learning to build predictive systems. It's a very well documented, understood approach. There's a lot of ways to monitor models in production and use them, and we see that across the force. There's predictive AI around, and that is largely what we see when we're doing pilots with customers. Um, Again, on the generative side, it's still new, so you'll have your hands full trying to adopt this new technology. And fundamentally, those challenges I mentioned aren't going to go away. You're going to have the data challenge, you're going to have the experimentation challenge, you're going to have the scope challenge, you're going to have the guardrails challenge. So just get to work now, is what I would say. Yeah.
That's good. That's good advice. Yeah, don't sit still. Just jump in, and uh, again, experimentation is key. I think is important there. So, what gets you excited? I mean, you get to see a lot. You get to play a lot of technology. You're working with a lot of great partners. In the things that you're seeing with the evolution of just in the AI space,
Mhm.
what gets you most excited, and where do you think we're going to end up here in the next couple of years?
Yeah, especially with a lens towards the public sector and defense. I I'm very excited and about the kind of the workforce augmentation side. I leverage generative AI all the time for coding and my own like research work, and that's changed the game and really saved me a ton of time and made our teams more efficient. So I think that's exciting. I think the idea of AI in product development broadly is uh, going to change how we think about products for the warfighter itself and our customers. So having a model as a core to a piece of software is new, and you're going to start to see very bespoke applications that are tailored to certain tasks. And I think that's inevitable. Going back to that scope problem, it's going to be,
Yeah,
if we can solve a problem with AI that makes a task 1 minute faster, that's super valuable if you've got 10,000 people in your organization. So you'll start to see these new tools coming out. But I'm personally the most excited, and I spend most of my time thinking about agentic AI and how it can be applied to really change how we work. So it is very exciting to think about. I mean, basically any API a LLM can control for the most part, and that opens up the door to a lot of interesting things. So, like, for example, drone flight, being able to um, uh, think about those behaving and coordinating in a semi-autonomous way is fascinating. But also the combination of predictive and generative AI. So one thing we're working on right now is if I have a supply chain problem and I see that the world changes, um, yeah, maybe there's an agent that's monitoring the overall metrics of my logistics system, and I notice there is a big change. Now an agent can very easily, at least with DataRobot, build out a new forecasting model, right? And rapidly experiment and even change order status for something that is late, alert a customer for something that's late, um, uh, execute an order for things that may be out of stock. So the ability to support systems, I think is super exciting for me. So,
yeah. I think we'll see all sorts of, I'll say, crazy and at the same time just amazing things over the next couple of years as these models evolve. We continue to see the power of cloud computing and the compute capacity that's available,
mhm.
that is doing just some amazing things in the area of augmenting these large language models with vision models and some other things. I think there is going to be some pretty cool stuff that's coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and I would also say too, just for especially for the federal force and defense, um, don't forget there is power in small models. Like
Yep.
there is, and fine tuning small models. We've seen um, this over and over again recently in the media, but again, being task specific. Like if you're training a sentiment, or you're trying to use an off-the-shelf sentiment model, or maybe using ChatGPT, and it's analyzing a sentence like, "Hey, this it's a ferocious warfighter," that might mean something very positive to the community, not necessarily to the existing, public model. So uh, going back to being task specific and the problem you want to solve, there's big opportunity there to make really powerful models that can function on edge devices, for example, or something you may not have access to make an API call to OpenAI or something like that. So that's going to be a really exciting area of work too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Chandler, we're about at time. I'm curious. Any last parting words of wisdom, insight, anything in particular you want to leave us with?
No, I'd say get started now. Generative or not, AI is changing the way we work, especially in the force. And again, our competition is actively embracing it. So we have an obligation to our country to pursue implementing that as leaders. And as we see a push by this in the past administration to do so, but we should embrace it. And I think there's more resources now than ever before to think about how to bring this to your organization. and you just have to get started and do that in a deliberate fashion. So we're here to help. I'm excited to see how we can use this technology to both better our country and better our posture globally. And it's if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to DataRobot. We're all of the DoD in the civilian and federal space. So I'm happy to work with you on how to turbocharge your current AI efforts or help you get started.
Fantastic. Well, Chandler, I appreciate you taking a few minutes out of your day to talk. And for those of you who have tuned in, we appreciate you joining another episode of Chat with Chet. And until next time, we stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.